right, tonight, Neil Young dropped in to say hi. We're filming a movie. Can you explain this?
We're just making a film about, I don't know, just the things that we want to film. There's really not a big plan about it right now. You're in it now, you know. It just keeps changing like that. You know,
someday somebody be able to go to the theater and see it, maybe?
Yeah, I hope so. Maybe pretty soon.
Welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about music documentaries brought to you by Treble Media. I'm a host, David Lizabram, here with my co-host,
Andrew Keats.
There you go. Today we're going to be talking about Harvest Time, a Neil Young film, directed by Bernard Shaky, who may or may not also be Neil Young, released in 2022, and it's about the making of the famous album Harvest. And we're joined by a very special guest today, Tyler Wilcox. Now, I know Tyler mostly from Aquarium Drunkard. I think, obviously we all know Treble is the best music website there is. That's by universal acclaim. However, if there is a second place, it's got to be Aquarium Drunkard. Just doing great stuff over there. If you have not checked out Aquarium Drunkard, people, do yourself a favor. It's unbelievable. And Tyler's doing great stuff over there. Tyler, say hi.
Hi, how are you guys?
Doing good. So we typically, when we have a guest on, we ask them to pick a film, and Tyler came through here with Harvest Time. A lot of times we start this by asking if it's like a less known artist, like how did you come to know about this person or whatever. That doesn't really apply with Neil Young, but I thought maybe we just talk about this album Harvest. Like how did each of you guys first encounter the Harvest album? Tyler?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I kind of came at Neil Young when I was pretty young, so to speak. But I don't know whether I heard Harvest. I must have heard Heart of Gold on the radio and Old Man on FM radio. As a kid, I listened to classic rock radio all the time. So I must have heard those songs. But I didn't heavily get into Neil Young until a little later when I heard things like, I think Ragged Glory was a record that I heard when I was a kid and really fell in love with, and Weld, the more Crazy Horse centric kind of stuff, the loud kind of things. And then I fell into sort of heavily into Neil Young bootlegs and things like that, where I was just kind of taken by, and I mean, even things that were, you know, back in the 90s, there were a bunch of records that Neil Young had not reissued. You couldn't get them on CD. You couldn't find them in, I don't know, Tower Records or whatever. So that was, you know, I would say that that's like something that took me into like used record stores, was like searching for Neil Young records that you couldn't find in certain places. So that was always kind of like my intro to it. But at some point I was just like, I need to get every Neil Young record. So Harvest came along, and it's, you know, obviously one of his huge blockbuster records. I believe it's his biggest selling record.
I think so.
I could be wrong about that, but it definitely was like the one that made him the full kind of household name that he is today, I think.
Andy, how did you first encounter this album?
Well, I first encountered this album, I guess it would have been probably the second substantial Neil Young piece of music I'd heard. I was pretty into Gold Rush when I was like just out of college. You know, again, as you said, obviously everybody encounters Neil Young,
knows the hits,
cultural figure. Particularly when I was young in the 90s, it was like the Pearl Jam stuff and Keep on Rockin' in the Free World was really big. But I really liked Gold Rush. Gold Rush was one of the first pieces of vinyl I owned. And then I think it was sort of a natural next point to go listen to Harvest. And it's great. And it's it holds up, and I've been listening to it very, very often ever since.
I kind of feel like, I came up in the early 90s as a teenager. Yeah. This was like the Godfather of grunge era of Neil.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And like the Harvest Moon album came out, and that was big, and I had that. But I kind of feel like at the time there was a thing where like Harvest was the uncool album or
Mhm.
something. I don't know if it was just my like weird vibe or got on or something, but it was like, no, man, it's cool to be into the Crazy Horse stuff and,
Yeah.
the Ditch trilogy. And if you like Harvest, you're lame, or something like that. I don't know. This was like those days. So like I kind of just absorbed that, and it took me a long time to get around to this album because I mean, I'm pretty sure I picked up like a used vinyl back in the day when you can get like any cool record on used vinyl.
They were free.
Like
They were free.
$2. I have my
Yeah.
I have my copy, and it still has the price tag on it, and it was $2.99.
Yeah, I'm sure I got mine at Lose Records in Encinitas for $1.99, $2.99, something like that. But it's probably like among the like 25 Neil albums that I've really dug into. It's probably maybe the one that I've spent I guess the least amount of time with, just because like I had that hanging over, and I remember like Andy Andy loves when I tell stories about my misbegotten music career, but
I do love them. Yeah.
In the
don't do
early
enough of it.
2000s,
Yeah.
in the early 2000s, I'm living in LA and I'm playing in this band. And we like I don't know, we fired our singer or something, and like we put an ad in Craigslist. We're looking for a singer, and we specifically said like our number one influence was like Neil Young and Crazy Horse, but like specifically the like rock and electric stuff, not the
It's
like
like in parentheses with like years.
yeah yeah. Very specifically, it was Neil Young and Crazy Horse, like asterisk, not the like mellow acoustic stuff. And so inevitably, like
It's like
singers would show
Jack
up.
Black's advertisement in High Fidelity.
Exactly.
Like a rigorous series of bullet points about what the right specific associations were.
Right, exactly. And yet people would show up to audition, and I'm using audition very loosely. And inevitably they'd be like, "Yeah, man, I saw your ad. I live Neil Young too," and whip out an acoustic guitar and like bust into Old Man or Heart of Gold, just like guaranteed. We just went through those guys. Like, sorry, here's the door. And so yeah, so I, that's I always kind of had that bug, but over time I kind of mellowed. My Gen X attitude softened,
Yeah.
and I realized that Harvest is not a sellout, and that it actually has rockin' songs, and it has like even though the hits you've heard a million times, like I'm not necessarily going to queue up Old Man like just for the hell of it, but in the context of the album, it all works as a piece, and it tells a story. So I'm not knocking it. It just I can't get past that. I have that little lingering, grunge
Yeah.
era. This is not the cool shit, man. You should be listening to like Crime in the City or something. I don't know. So
Yeah, it was. I mean, yeah, it was definitely his sort of pop crossover. But when I listen to it now, I'm always kind of like it is actually a lot weirder of an album than that suggests. I mean, like a lot of the songs are kind of odd things. I mean, they're obviously, you can see why Heart of Gold and Old Man were sort of like these hits, but aside from that, you're kind of like, well, I mean, like a lot of the lyrics are pretty kind of like they're dark. I mean, I was talking to somebody who was like, Harvest is really like the first Ditch record. Like there's these very kind of dark moods on it, and just sort of strange approaches to various topics that he's getting into. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, when I hear it now, and I probably had the same idea where it was just like, oh, On the Beach is much cooler than Harvest. But at the same time, I'm like, well, I mean, maybe, Harvest has sort of maybe more depth than people give it credit for.
Yeah, so let's talk about the movie. Yeah. So Tyler, how did you, how did you kind of come to check this one out? And I don't know, kind of lay this one out for us.
Yeah,
What are we looking at here?
Well, I mean, it's it's footage that's all filmed. I believe it's completely 1971, so it sort of takes you through various recording sessions and various sort of happenings that are going on in Neil's life during the course of the making of this record. And yeah, it's like completely what I probably like the most about it is that it's completely self-contained. It doesn't have any talking heads in it. It doesn't explain anything to you. It's not like it's 1971 and Neil Young is part of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and he's making a record in Nashville, or he's making a record on his ranch or whatever. You don't get anything. You're just sort of dropped into these zones. And I really like that personally. I mean, some people might want more context if you're not like as sort of fully enmeshed in Neil Young's life and music as I am. But I really appreciated that Neil was just like, you know what, we've got all this footage, let's put it together in a way that's, you know, it's watchable, it's interesting, but it's not telling us what Harvest is or was or what it means.
And what's interesting about it to me is that decision to not update it with talking heads or contextual sort of graphics on screen or commentary or anything like that is a very 1971 decision. That's how the documentary would have been made in 1971. The footage is all from 1971, but the movie was made in 2022.
Yeah, it was all stitched together.
Yeah, stitched together, and so it's it feels like a movie actually that was made when it was filmed. It does
like
not
Festival
feel
Express or something.
Yeah, or like the Woodstock movie, you know, or something like that, where it's, you know, it's just like the sort of 30 for 30 era of hand holding documentaries had not dawned yet, you know.
Yeah. I mean, the one that it reminds me the most of, I don't know if you guys have done it on the show. There's a Les Blank documentary about Leon Russell called "A Poem is a Naked Person" that came out. I mean, it was actually probably filmed right around the same time as this, and it is very much just sort of like, here's this guy, like this songwriter, this guy making a record, but this is sort of his world, and you're just going to spend some time in it. You know, there's not going to be like a real narrative, although Harvest Time does have, I mean, I feel like it does, you know, it does take you through this process in a lot of ways, but it's not going to be like telling you a lot of stuff. You're just going to kind of like luxuriate in the Neil Young vibe.
Right.
The most that it does is every time a new person appears on the screen,
right,
like in a typewriter font, it'll say their name. So at least
it says their name. It doesn't say who they are or what they're doing or what
like,
they're, you know, you're just sort
Terry
of supposed
Snodgrass,
to know.
Jack Nitzsche, you know, whatever. Like that's what you get. Candy butter.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you know, the my kind of first take on this movie was, we watch a lot of documentaries that are like you know, more conventional in terms of telling a narrative and covering a long scope of an artist's career. And a lot of times, you know, they'll get to the point where they're recording an album and you see clips of them in the studio recording the album, and we always are like, where is this footage? There must be tons of footage. Let's see it. Like, how come this is locked away in a vault and we only get to see the 2 minutes of it that are, you know, that made the cut in this movie? And
10 seconds.
and this is that. Like, you know what I mean? This is it. This is the, for better or worse, this is what we were asking for, which is
there's a lot of uncut performances. And I mean, it's like, it is the sort of thing that maybe for somebody who isn't, you know, a super Neil Young fan necessarily might be like, why are we watching the band just sort of jam aimlessly? But like for me, I was like, this is exactly what I want. This is I want to watch this, you know, just be in the barn, which is where they recorded a fair amount of the record. You get to just sit there and enjoy whatever is going on and watch these guys play and put this stuff together. Even if some of it is a little bit aimless, you're kind of like no, this is fucking awesome. I love this.
Yeah, I mean, musically the whole movie's great, but there are the two extended jams where they're not really playing anything and they just fall into a little pocket and jam.
They're vamping.
They're just vamping, and it is absolute highlight material. Like,
it's cool.
They've got a couple cool shots looking across the piano. And then the one of Neil just like geeking out, like he's just so into the little vamp pocket they fall into. It's great.
Yeah, it's great. And it is, it's just, it is a total pleasure to see these guys and hear these guys who are the Stray Gators, who are this band that has been put together. I mean, very much, you know, kind of by happenstance, at least if you believe the stories that, you know, Neil just sort of encountered a lot of these guys in Nashville, initially recorded Heart of Gold and Old Man and a few other songs in Nashville, and then was like, this is obviously something I should keep going, and then brought Jack Nitzsche into the fold to play piano and brought them all out to his ranch outside of Redwood City, and you get this sort of great snapshot of Neil's life at the time, which is this strange countryside scene that he's got going. And he was out, he lived at this ranch. I mean, he must have only been there for a little while at that point, but I mean, he lived there until a few years ago, I think. I think at some point he sold it, or he maybe lost it in his divorce. So that may have been but he was there forever. So, I mean, the ranch was just sort of like this legendary thing. And, I'd seen photos and seen some of this footage floating around at times, but this is really the best representation of that thing that you always heard about, and him sort of talking about going to the ranch. You'd always be like, what is that like? And this, you literally kind of get that you get to ride in the car with him through the forest or whatever.
Yes.
So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's the most amazing like Airbnb preview of what hanging out on the ranch is going to be like.
Yeah. Rolling hills, cow pies.
That's not all they're rolling.
Yeah.
There's a lot,
but it is. Yeah, I mean that's what I mean. One of the things with the Harvest, the back of Harvest, the cover, the photograph is that them in the barn, and you as a kid you just like see that and stare at it and be like, wow, that is like some pretty major vibes going on there. And now you get to sort of just step right in there.
Immaculate vibes. This whole movie is
I've got that
10 out of 10 vibes.
There's not much of a story, but there are vibes to carry us along. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Perfect.
So as the resident Neil Young historian, I mean, maybe just tell the listeners a little bit about this cast of characters: Jack Nitzsche and Ben Keith, who becomes a major part of the Neil Young story, and all these guys are pretty big figures in his world.
Yeah. Jack Nitzsche is somebody that he worked with in the Buffalo Springfield. He's the one who did the big orchestrations on Expecting to Fly, that big thing. But Jack Nitzsche is like, he is like a kind of legendary producer. He worked as Phil Spector's kind of musical arranger. So you hear something like Be My Baby, that is primarily Jack Nitzsche. It's not really Phil Spector. He's the one who's kind of putting all this stuff together. And he worked with, tons and tons of people. He's I think him and Neil had, a very on-off relationship. They were very close.
Neil Young with an on-off relationship.
Well, yeah, that's musical. True. I mean, I think Jack Nitzsche is sort of infamous. He's maybe not. He's the kind of person who might be, if he was still alive today, would be canceled. But a musical genius in many respects, and super interesting guy. I mean, it is interesting that he's a pretty sophisticated musician. Obviously, he was the guy. I mean, he put together the Man Needs a Maid, scores and everything, those big orchestral things.
Yeah.
And I mean, he did a bunch of soundtracks. But it's interesting to see him playing with this very earthy kind of music, very simple stuff. But it's great to see him playing piano. It's amazing.
He also won an Academy Award for "Up Where We Belong" from Unofficer.
Right.
With a Joe Cocker tune.
He's got he has a very rich tapestry behind him. I mean, just like there are a few like compilations of stuff that he arranged or solo stuff that he did, and they're just kind of fascinating because they go in a million different directions. But yeah, he's an interesting guy. And then Ben Keith, who would become, a primary part of Neil Young's sound pretty much up until Ben Keith died, probably a little over a decade ago. But yeah, he's a Nashville guy. I think that his first, he was a very established Nashville pedal steel player. I think that, he even goes back to Patsy Cline. I think he played on maybe Walking After Midnight or something. One of those songs, one of those big Patsy Cline songs has Ben Keith on it. But he's like one of these guys.
I Fall to Pieces is what you're thinking of.
I Fall to Pieces. Okay, that's right. But yeah, he's a huge. I mean, even just like the first song on Harvest, out on the Weekend, that big, wide open pedal steel sound is just iconic, and it Neil Young obviously just sort of fell in love with that sound and brought him on to a whole bunch of his projects going forward. So he's a huge part of it. And then the other guys, there's Tim Drummond and Kenny Buttrey is the rhythm section. Those guys are also Nashville dudes. Tim Drummond, they have, Kenny Buttrey's on Blonde. He's like he's on tons of Gordon Lightfoot records. He's somebody who you couldn't even sum up, really. He's probably one of the greatest Nashville drummers of all time, which is always funny because, you see him playing with Neil. Again, it's this thing where he's like a drummer who's pretty much capable of anything. And then I think Neil is like literally making him sit on his hands sometimes so he's not like doing a bunch of fancy fills. He just really liked the groove that he was getting.
Basically, like each of these guys deserves their own rock doc.
Yeah, kind of.
If you look up like the Wikipedia pages for any of these guys, it's like, holy cow, these people played with everybody. They, just like hit after hit, classic after classic.
Yeah,
and if they're still around or whatever, there's stories to tell. So,
the crazy thing is that you look at this record, and I think that almost everybody has died. And I don't think there's. I was trying to think of if there's anybody who's still kicking, because Elliot Mazer, the producer, the guy who shows up, in the truck and making sure all the levels are right at the barn. He died a couple years ago, and the rest of them, I think they're all gone. So it is sort of like this very, I feel like that comes across in the film. It's like, I think that maybe that's why Neil finally was like, I'm going to sit down and do this, is because he wanted to like see these people again.
Yeah. So is there a story? Is there a lore about why this movie didn't come out earlier? Because Neil, is asked in the movie, when's this movie going to come out? And he says, very soon. Hopefully you guys get to see it in the movie theater soon. It'll be good promotion for the album, Like,
well, what it became, and this is probably, it became his first. There's footage that was filmed around the same time for Journey Through the Past, which was his 1973 sort of like. I don't even know what you'd call it. It's not a documentary, but it has sort of documentary footage. But it also has sort of fictional elements going through it. It's not a great movie. In fact, I think it might be bad. But it's, as far as vibes go, it's like, it's more like bad vibes, I think. But that was, I think, a lot of what, at least the camera crew, I believe, is the same people were filming that stuff that Neil then took and was like, I'm going to make this sort of like weird hallucinatory dream movie instead of making a documentary about Harvest. But it's lucky that they, were there to film it all, because we can actually see it now. But there's a lot of, Journey Through the Past. If you guys haven't watched it, I don't know if I would recommend it. It's probably like on the lower end of your Neil Young, like once you've done everything, you could probably be like, okay, maybe.
I've never seen it. I've always kind of heard like Ronaldo and Clara vibes.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, it's along those lines.
And to wrap it up, it's a very similar. Now we get the source footage for this, just as Ronaldo and Clara footage became
Rolling Thunder stuff.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, Sharon Stone doesn't show up in this one, although presumably she was there. So I don't know.
No. Yeah, she was around.
Clearly
dating Gene Simmons or something. But you do get some glimpses of the actress Neil's. I guess they were never married, but his girlfriend at the time, and they had a kid together around this time, Carrie Snodgrass, who a lot of these songs are about, and she's not like a huge presence in the film, but she sort of floats in there, and you're like, oh yeah, there she is. So it's great and you get to see his manager, Elliot Roberts. So it does feel, like there's like this very personal element to it, where I feel like he's, Neil wants to sort of see these people at this point, because it must be, at least to some extent, a very happy time in Neil's life, I think. Creative time, and I think things did sort of go a little bit downhill after this.
I would say this is like the most relaxed
dude,
I've ever seen Neil Young in any context.
completely.
Yeah.
Like when he's alone and he's talking, he seems like composed, possessed, and totally comfortable with himself.
Yeah.
When he's hanging out with, like, Stills and Graham Nash, and they're working on their harmonies, it's like, how did these
They
guys
seem
ever
very pleased.
yeah, how did these guys ever have a fight? They seem like best friends, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of jokes. Yeah, those
Yeah.
are that's amazing footage.
Oh, that
I
stuff
feel like
is
that's like really just a cool
yeah.
vision of those guys actually working together, as opposed to being like, this sort of weird, like,
Yeah, and it was so nice
fighting.
with David Crosby recently dying, seeing him in that one section where they're working on the
Yeah.
harmony with David Crosby, and he's they're essentially helping break how the harmony will work, and and Crosby's talking him through it, and you just hear why they were the best at what they did together, and how it really comes through how they're working it out, and how easy they spoke to each other, how much they could communicate to each other, and
it seems like
voices
musically was not not the issue. Like they obviously really respected each other musically, but then once maybe other things got involved, they were kind of like, okay, that's enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it is bittersweet in a way, because you see Bruce Berry briefly, who famously went on to pass away shortly after that, after this, a year or so, I guess, maybe after this. And you don't see the Crazy Horse guys, so you don't see Danny, but it's that time where, like, there's this innocent moment in Neil's life before these two very important people in his life both die, and heroin, and hard drugs take over, and it just, you get a sort of dissolution and all these problems. I mean, obviously Neil continues to crank out, unbelievable music through it all. But it doesn't seem like he ever really recovers that kind of innocent, sweet vibe. He kind of becomes, troubled and I mean, kind of an ornery guy. And I'm sure he was that part of him existed in this time as well. He's already, ready to basically bail on CSNY and all these other things. But it is kind of that bittersweetness. If you know the story, knowing that this is just this magical moment that's like, and the movie is beautiful, in turn, it must have been shot, it looks like probably 16 millimeter. But most of it's shot in this ranch and these like dry hills in Northern California. And Neil's just talking about how, like, he never needs to leave this place. He's found his home. He's so comfortable and happy. And it's like he can just make his art untroubled, and you kind of know it's never going to last. And I mean, that kind of comes through in the music too. Like, it seems like he knows on some level, like, that's, he's always kind of had that, like, old wise beyond his years thing,
he's
from
a
the beginning of his
fatalist.
career.
He knows that things are not gonna stay the same. I think that's probably that is probably a thing that runs through his entire career, is that things change rapidly and not always for the better. But but I mean, it is true. It's just very nicely filmed. And you watch it and you're just sort of like this is kind of a privilege to be able to just kind of soak up. It feels super intimate, like he's comfortable, like, I mean, as you said, very relaxed with the filmmakers too.
I mean, just in terms of getting into some moments, because for people who are listening to this episode and haven't listened to the movie yet, there really isn't much of a story. We're going through the album, we see every song, I believe, on the record gets a moment.
I think the only one that you don't hear is Needle and the Damage Done, which is actually a live recording on the record. So, I mean, maybe that was just something that he didn't feel like was necessary to put in there. And
then they're just interspersed with these sort of little serendipitous moments at in the barn. They take a couple trips to the studio. People hanging out together. But one that really stands out is when he's lounging on the hillside, and they're sort of he's talking about his grappling with fame, and it's really fascinating because his problem is not his being famous and people talking to him. It's that no one knows how to talk to him anymore. And
Right.
people know him and he doesn't know them, and they're flustered by it. And it makes all of his interactions labored because of how other people are acting, not because of how he's acting. And he's really clear-minded about it. And, uh, 50 years later, what stands out to it is how much of his thinking there became relevant in the 90s when he sort of became like Uncle Neil for all of the grunge acts of the early 90s, and decided he was going to swoop in for these kids and do for them what no one was there to do for him, and what he thought that those people needed. Um, Certainly did that with Pearl Jam, and I think he has really interesting thoughts about how much he wishes he got to talk to Kurt Cobain. And it's just really hard for me to not listen to him grappling with that fame then, and put it in that context of how he sort of carries the next generation, or the 2 generations later of musicians along with him for those thoughts, when he's no longer a young man anymore at that point.
Yeah, for sure. And it's one of those things where it's, he's obviously a person of, he's thoughtful and has, this level of integrity that probably carried him through a lot of the things that a lot of his peers weren't able to weather very well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, or Crosby, Stills and Nash, and you're like, well, I mean, like, you can see how those guys just sort of blew it in various different ways. And he, and it probably does have to do, at least to some extent, with the people that he surrounded himself with, that there was some amount of just, being able to step back and not be run around by the fame machine. And the ranch, obviously, I mean, he got out of there. I mean, if he had stayed, and he was back and forth, but I mean, if he had just been like, I live in Malibu, that probably would have been a completely different person, different songwriter entirely.
Yeah, and he, in that same kind of moment when he's talking about that, he kind of takes a dig at himself and calls himself a rich hippie.
Yeah.
He's aware of the contradictions of his situation.
Very self-aware.
Yes. Tortured by them, I'm sure.
I mean, it is what it is, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what he says. He says it means that I have a chance to live what I think is a normal life.
Right.
That's what the barn gives him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which is interesting, but I mean, it's just like the contrast, you go from him being sort of like the, seeming extremely humble and kind of like, oh, wow, this is just something that happens. And then, I mean, I think it does literally just cut to him with the, Royal Philharmonic Orchestra or something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like this guy who is self-aware and has sort of like a humility, but he's also like extremely ambitious and confident too, like has a very high level. He's not like I'm just a guy playing guitar and like hanging out. Like he is somebody who has he has like a very like this like high level of confidence in what he's doing and how he wants it to sound. I mean, that scene is amazing too, the Philharmonic scene, because you're like, I mean, just the fact that they're doing it live in a room is kind of insane.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so interesting to watch. Yeah. I
think that's my favorite part of the movie. So he's playing the song "A Man Needs a Maid," which we can maybe put a pin in that one. It's been a subject of conversation.
A whole other podcast.
I think it's kind of the thing where what he saw as a metaphor maybe didn't come across, or doesn't necessarily scan. Maybe not, especially now. But nonetheless, he picks a song to be played by, I think it's the London Symphony Orchestra. That is has, I mean, Neil always plays with his own weird sense of rhythm, and like I kind of always get like a little bit of a Thelonious Monk vibe from him. Not that he listened to Monk, because at one point in this they asked him about Art Tatum and he doesn't know who that is, so but a guy who like you can hear just from the rhythm of 2 notes immediately there's only one person whose musical fingerprint is that, you know what I mean? And Neil plays that way, and and this song particularly has like so many dynamic changes and slows and starts, and like, so he's sitting there playing a piano in this room with the orchestra and trying to get them to play with him and just like be on his level, man. And it's pretty interesting. So now Andy and I last year went and saw Bob Weir and Wolf Brothers play. And so he had like not a full orchestra, but like maybe 6 or 8 orchestral musicians playing with him, and they're all jamming. And I listened to some interviews with him, or read some interviews, whatever, where he was talking about how like Bob has this vision of like the Grateful Dead music carrying on for like hundreds of years after he's gone. And he is like he's kind of on this mission now where he like identifies like orchestral type musicians that like maybe can jam a little bit, and he brings them out with Wolf Brothers and like kind of teaches them how to do it. And then the idea being that they're going to go back to orchestras and kind of seed that in there so that like eventually they can learn how to, whatever. So like it just kind of reminded me of that, that same mission in a way of like taking these classical musicians and sort of corrupting them or something, somehow teaching them to swing or to get on this groove. So, and it's, here you've got a conductor who's following Neil. Neil's kind of keeping his own time. And of course the conductor has to be signaling, a tiny fraction of a second before the orchestra is going to play that beat, like, because there's, he can't, there's just like the synapses have to fire, these things have to happen in a certain sequence. And it's really interesting to see how they work that all out. And eventually they get there. And, I'd never seen anything like that. It was a fascinating scene. Super cool.
It's so cool. So you guys know the musicians in the band better. The one guy who's talking to Neil, he says, the difference between what they do and rock music is they don't feel the pulse. They play what's on the page. And Neil's like, well, they can, they can look at me. And the guy's like, no, that's what they don't do. That's what they don't do.
They literally play what's in front of them. And I mean, it's like, you're talking about, I mean, I was like looking at some of those musicians and I was like, I think some of those guys were born in the previous century, like, I mean, it's like,
I think probably
they're like
true.
They're guys who are just like fully, but at the same time, I mean, you were getting at that during that period, you were getting all of these sort of orchestral things. The conductor mentions Pink Floyd,
the Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd.
Have you heard a band called The Pink Floyd?
Don't know them. And
he says I've heard of them, but I have not.
Yeah, I've heard of them. I haven't heard them. Do you think he's heard them? Has he heard them
now?
It's possible he hasn't.
Maybe when he's putting this together in 2022, he's like, I got to check out the Pink Floyd.
The Pink Floyd.
He's heard Merle Haggard for sure.
Yeah, he likes Merle Haggard
a handful of times.
He likes Merle Haggard a lot. But I mean, there's all these sort of experiments with big orchestras, probably starting with the Beatles doing stuff like that. But then, something like Pink Floyd. I was actually looking at the conductor's sort of CV, and right around the same time he was doing, he was the conductor for Ornette Coleman's Skies of America.
Oh my gosh.
Sort of like a free jazz, orchestral composition. And so, I mean, I was like, well, this guy's hip, obviously, like he knows, he knows that things aren't going to go exactly like the way that they're going to be, but he has like a 90-piece orchestra in there that he has to explain things to, and then talk to the weird hippie.
And at least as far as I could tell, the way they eventually worked it out was he's conducting with his full body turned, looking at Neil.
He's watching Neil.
He was watching Neil and conducting. Which is he was improvising as you go. So I mean, but I mean, it is hilarious to just see, like Neil Young and Jack Nucci drinking probably like tall boys of Coors and hanging out, putting the Coors thing on the Steinway piano. And Neil loves that piano too. Like, this piano is great.
We got to get one for the ranch.
But that conductor, low key MVP. Props to that guy.
He pulls it together. But it's a crazy. But I mean, that's sort of what I mean. But like, I mean, with Harvest just being sort of like this weird record, you've got, people are like, oh yeah, it's like, his full country rock record. And then you're like, there's 2 songs on there that are these huge, weird, dark orchestral, tangles, which are very bizarre lyrically and strange musically. And they're just, they're right there on this record. So
very cool. So we get that. We get the it's kind of cutting back and forth between that and like Jams in the Barn that look like they were all maybe filmed the same day or
probably
within a day or two.
It was probably just showing
and
up
and they're just jamming out on Alabama, and that's absolutely killer. And then
yes,
you get
they
this.
also play Journey Through the Post, which is not on Harvest, right?
Yeah, there's an outtake version, like a Nashville version.
Okay.
He plays a solo piano version of it, I guess probably at somewhere in the ranch that he's playing that. But yeah, there's a great solo version or a great band version of that that's on one of the first Archives box set.
Okay.
That has it has Ben Keith and those guys on it.
Then you get like this brief trip to a Nashville radio station. And it's not really clear what the sequence is, when these different things happen.
Well, I mean, it looks like they go back to Nashville to mix the record. I think they're in Quadraphonic Studios, which is Elliot Mazur's studio. So they're mixing and maybe doing, I don't know, an overdub or something, like there's a little bit of jam session. And then he just, he kind of wanders around going to talk to a funny Southern DJ and then a strange 12-year-old boy.
A 12-year-old boy, fascinating little guy.
He's a little showbiz Nashville kid.
I looked up that kid and now I can't remember his name. I feel bad.
Gil Gilliam.
Gil Gilliam. Who I guess
he was sort of a minor celebrity in Nashville for whatever. He was just kind of like a novelty guy.
Right. He had some kind of serious medical issue. And right. He didn't live a very long life, but he he did seem to he makes a big impression in this movie. So he's 12. He has this Nashville accent, but like also like almost a British accent sometimes.
And it's just a weird.
I can't tell if that's because of his medical issues or something that comes across, but like he tells his story about how like he interviewed Ringo. And when Ringo was recording his Nashville album Boo Coops of Blues, and he's like, and Neil's like, well, how did that go? He's like, well, I caught him in the parking lot and he was coming out of his Cadillac at an inopportune time.
Just shoved a mic in his face and said, I'm a 12-year-old, let's do this.
But it's a cute little interview. I mean, it's charming, he's talking about like, and that's where he's talking about like, well, what is this? You're filming something? And Neil's like, yeah, hopefully you'll get to see it soon, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a scene where I'm like, well, these guys are clearly just coming from doing a lot of drugs and they're talking to the 12-year-old. Are they?
Right. Yeah.
Like there's a very like, they're like kind of, lurching around a little bit with this scene. I mean, I guess it's like right before that you get to see Tim Drummond's, kind of bizarre aquarium pot smoking device. He's building that
pipe of some kind.
Which is an amazing scene too. It's like
they're all very amused by it. Yes.
he takes a little gizmo that pumps air into an aquarium that like will be like a bubbler, and he hooks that up to like a pipe so that it's just a constant flow of marijuana.
You just put your face in it and you're ready to go.
Yeah, and he just passes it around, and Nietzsche
runs away. Which
he declines. Conspicuously declines.
He's pretending that he's the straightest one, but maybe he didn't like smoking pot, but he maybe liked doing everything else.
Yeah, exactly. But,
he was not a teetotaler by any means.
No, but they all get a real kick out of that.
They're cracking up. Yeah, and then so with the kid, he also it's obviously it's just coincidental, but he talks to Ringo about the making of Let It Be, and he explains that Ringo hated the making of Let It Be, which this is kind of a very Get Back movie, right? Like it's the making of a classic album 50 years later, found footage that was originally shot for what became another movie, and then pulled out of the archives to make something else.
And a lot of like real time
stuff with nothing, no skip forwards, right? Exactly, no contemporary.
And Glyn Johns shows up at the orchestral session. He's the producer is there for some reason. I don't know if is he credited on the record for doing anything?
I'm not sure.
Or was he just like he was there to give spiritual guidance of some kind? I don't know.
But also, Neil gives the wisdom, David, that you gave during our Get Back episode, where the kid asks him, so what's up with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and Neil says, well, just because we haven't played together or made an album in a year and a half doesn't mean we're broken up. We'll play together when we play together, and when we're not gonna. It's just as you say, that like during the recording of Let It Be, when they're at each other's throats and George has all this other material he wants to record, you're like, the solution is screaming out to us now, 50 years later. Just go make some solo albums, and then every once in a while get back together.
Yeah.
And it occurred to Neil. It did not occur to Paul, John, or George, or Ringo.
Can't
but Neil saw it clearly.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, and the just the idea of those guys. I mean, it is funny. I mean, obviously Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young were probably, they were, kind of thought of as the replacement for the Beatles. So they were kind of like at that stage in 1971, they're probably as big as they ever were post Deja Vu. And you are like, they put out a record the previous year. Why is everybody freaking out that they're not, but things moved, I think, at a different pace at that point. It was like, why haven't you put out, it's been 9 months since that last record. Let's do another one. It's been
9 months and you're all performing on each other's solo albums.
Yeah.
And also you're all performing on like
other
albums.
Right. And I think the Stills Young record came out about this time. I don't remember exactly the sequence of events here.
Stills Young came out in 76. So
okay. So that was later. Yeah. Okay. All right.
They got together. They did that tour in, I think it was 1974, and with the idea of doing another record. But obviously they didn't do another record until the classic American Dream from 1988 that everybody loves and listens to constantly.
And this is also when they're screwing around with Jerry and Jorma and the Planet Earth.
There's a lot going. I mean, they're making a lot of music.
a lot of music.
Endless amounts of music.
But
people were very fixated on CSNY, I think.
Another comp for Get Back is famously in that film you get Paul just sitting there with his bass and he comes up with the song Get Back. In this one, you get Neil kind of just dicking around on a banjo with his harmonica, and he seems to it seems like he writes out on the weekend, or part of it, like right in front of you.
Yeah, I don't know if that's actually, he definitely played that song live before that, I believe. He would have played that early in 1971, so depending on when that little snippet was filmed, he's not quite making it up, but he's definitely futzing around with it in some way.
Yeah, he seems to get a kick out of the pickup truck line, and so
totally.
He's cracking himself up.
He's cracking himself up the whole song. He's having such a fun time.
He might be high. I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure.
There's a very distinct possibility that he might have smoked a little bit of weed before.
The thing is, watching this movie, you would just think Neil Young is just the most fun-loving, sweet guy.
The guy you would want in your band.
Right.
Yeah. He must have felt very. At that stage, it must have just felt like he was doing exactly what he wanted and didn't feel a lot of the pressures that maybe would come. The pressures that would come from just having this huge record, I think was, he spent a little bit of time just dealing with that. The tour after this is sort of famously disastrous. It's the one that Time Fades Away. Mm-hmm. So he took the Stray Gators on tour, and a lot of it was, I think he just had trouble getting a sound that he thought was good in these sort of big places. Because, the Stray Gators were not people who had played arenas and everything. And I think he sort of struggled making them sound like, I think what he wanted was them to sound like Crazy Horse. And it was like, these guys don't sound like Crazy Horse.
Bunch of studio musicians. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to remember, that he becomes orders of magnitude more famous.
Yeah.
You know, when this record comes out right after this movie was filmed, you know, he's already like talking about fame and all those things, but like, yeah, he's the fourth letter in CSNY. You know,
I mean, at that
he's
point,
probably
he
not
became
the most
somebody who your parents knew who he was. You know, like
right.
he was on AM radio. He was, you know, like he was somebody who was more of a household name than he was. You know, I mean, even though we said, you know, like CSNY was huge, but he was sort of like the dark horse of the band. He wasn't like the main dude by any means for that. So it was like with this, it was like now he's the biggest one of them all, really.
I think we talked about a lot of the like kind of bits and moments and stuff, but I think you know, the core of this is the music.
Totally.
Because I mean, this is like it's 2 hours like on the dot, and probably like an hour and 45 minutes of that is just solid music.
Yeah.
It is a lot of performances. There's a brief performance from the Massey Hall appearance. But that's the only like thing that's like in front of a crowd. Everything else is either just like in the studio, the barn, Neil hanging around playing the banjo, guys hanging out, jam, you know, like that kind of thing. And I mean, it is just like, as somebody who's spent so many years listening to Neil Young bootlegs and seen him live a bunch of times and stuff like that, it is just such a treat to get this like era documented so well in such, you know, with the film. I mean, you know, you can actually see it is, you know, it's like a dream.
Yeah, it's up close. It feels very personal, and it feels like, you know, exactly the kind of film that you kind of wish existed for a lot of, you know, records, whether it's Neil Young or Bob, you know, like any of these things. If you imagine any other classic record, you're kind of like, well, this is what I would want to see. I would want to see like Blood on the Tracks like this, or so, you know, like something like that,
sure.
where you're like this would be great if you could kind of put yourself into this scene.
And particularly any album where like the location is itself such a big part of the story of the album, and boy, does this location lend itself cinematically to being on film. It's so good looking.
Yeah. It's super nice. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy, and you know, I mean, it is, you know, Neil Young has an extremely checkered film career, or Bernard Shaky does, I guess. Even the ones that are like these sort of classic, I mean, something like Rust Never Sleeps is a classic concert film, but it has all these sort of odd, maybe kind of misguided conceptual elements that you're kind of like, I mean, they're lovable stuff in a certain way. Yeah, but they're just kind of like, well, what is this really like getting anything across? But I really, you know, watching Harvest Time, I was like, this is really like, you know, he really nails the landing on this, where it's like, it feels like a great statement and just a great movie, I think.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap it up, you know, typically we'll ask, you know, if somebody isn't necessarily just a fan of Neil Young or doesn't know a lot about him, whatever, like, would you recommend this film? Now, in this particular case, like right now, as we speak, the only way to watch the movie is through the Neil Young archives, like neilyoung.com, meaning like you have to subscribe, which is like, okay, $20. You could, you know, sign up for a month and get all the goodies and stuff like that. So it's certainly worth it, but it's not something that's like probably going to show up on Netflix or whatever. But putting that aside, if it was accessible,
your cousin's not at risk of like stumbling across like it showing up in their algorithm and just watching it and going,
you have to seek it out.
Yes.
But be that as it may, would you recommend this film, or is it really something that's like for the heads?
I don't know. I mean, I was actually talking to my mom about it. And I was like, no, I think you would actually like it. I mean, it is like, it's not like it's, you know, it's not necessarily going to give you a bunch of stuff where you're like, okay, now I know like what, you know, the details of Harvest or whatever, but you are going to know how it felt to make the record. And it just is. Yeah. I mean, as we said, it's like, it is such a nice vibes film that you can watch it, you know, maybe like super actively, or you could kind of watch it in a relaxed fashion and just be like, it's playing in the background almost. It has sort of an ambient feel to it that's I really like. So yeah, I would recommend it. I don't think you obviously would get a lot more out of it if you're versed in all the sort of Neil Young lore, but I don't think that it's entirely necessary to enjoy it.
Yeah, I think you'd have to be into music. Yeah, like there are some rock docs that are like you don't even have to care about music at all. Like even like like some kind of great ones, even like Some Kind of Monster. Doesn't matter who you are. It's just a movie. This is not that. But I don't think you have to be a Neil Young head specifically. I think it's a fun hangout movie. And I think it pretty much just goes down easy. I think it's just an easy watch, and
and the honey slide of a movie,
and it's so beautiful, man. Yeah,
it's beautiful. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I would recommend it with the reservations. Same way, like it's got to be the right kind of person in the right kind of mood. But yeah, it's definitely a good hangout movie. Like, I can definitely see Andy comes over next weekend with the kids. Kids are running around. Throw this one on the TV.
Absolutely.
Cracking a beer and just have this one on in the background while we try not to let our kids not, murder each other. And
you're not going to miss any. You're not going to miss any major plot points or anything, or like a great revelation or something. You're going to just kind of,
and there's a lot of like great moments, like great rock doc moments. I mean, Crosby and Neil harmonizing Alabama is like top tier stuff. Everything with the London Symphony Orchestra, top tier stuff. Even the Goofy Kid, like that's cool rock doc stuff. That's what we're here for.
Yeah,
absolutely. Andy, are there any questions you would like to ask Tyler?
Tell us about your band.
About Prairiewolf.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a band. It's an instrumental band that started about a year ago here in Colorado, and we just put out our first record, which is self-titled. It's on Centripetal Force Records, and yeah, it's kind of like I don't know. It has elements of like Americana, but also sort of krautrock floating through there. It has lap steel, guitar, various synths and mellotrons and Fender Rhodes. And then also, I guess the sort of defining thing about it is that behind it all, we have like a Acetone rhythm machine, which is a very sort of early primitive drum machine that people like Sly Stone and Sandy Bull used back in the old days. So, I don't know exactly. It sort of fits into sort of this cosmic American music thing that's been kind of floating around a little bit with various bands. But at the same time, when, I listen to the record, I'm kind of like, well, it doesn't, I don't know. It feels fairly unique to me. But it's cool. It's been a fun band to be in, and you can get it on Bandcamp right now. We're actually sold out of both the vinyl and the CD, but we are repressing that, and that'll probably be like maybe end of the summer or something, when there'll be actual physical goods to be had. But yeah, that's what it's been great to do it. It's a different sort of I've been in more straightforward like indie rock bands in the past, but this is pretty fun, and it's fun to play like this sort of open-ended music. And we've been playing live a fair amount, and it's totally fun. It's like a weird challenge to play this kind of music, but we're figuring it out as we go.
Much like I said about the film, I will say about the album, immaculate vibes.
Yeah. It's supposed to be vibes. Yeah, like our whole kind of, at least my sort of thinking with it was that it was the kind of music that we could easily play in the background at a brewery or something, but could also be playing in some sort of psychedelic light show space or something. It's I think it is like it's not hard to listen to, but it's not like some of it is a little weird. But yeah, it's super fun. It's a good band. But yeah, I think prairiewolfmusic.bandcamp.com is where to go for that.
Love it. Andy, any other bands you want to ask about?
No, I'm retiring my onslaught of questions. It's
Really?
It's gone so poorly.
Really?
all right.
Come
Tyler,
on, do it for me.
what do you think about Goose, Tyler? Do you know Goose?
I don't know if I've heard Goose.
Okay.
I mean, I know of them. I'm gonna have the Neil Young answer to that. I know.
The Pink Floyd. Yeah.
Yeah, they're huge. Yeah, the Goose. I don't know them. But yeah,
they're big in Colorado.
Here.
Yeah, totally.
And I know people who are pretty excited about them. I don't know. I mean, are they like comparable to Fish? I'm not a Fish guy either.
Well, preempts the next question. I think there are certainly some similarities. I don't think that they sound much like Fish per se. I think it's.
I'm not a Fish guy, but I like Goose. Let's just lay it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the guys in Goose grew up as Fish fans, and the influence is clear. But I don't think that they sound like them very much. I think there's much more of sort of the indie rock that they, because just think about how much younger they are. That they also came up with a lot of indie rock that I think
they're like 20 somethings. Is that what they? I mean, are they
late 20s? They're like about 30 now.
Okay.
So I think you hear a lot of My Morning Jacket and Fleet Foxes and stuff like that, and the National.
Yeah, yeah, no, they're big out here. And I mean, I say, I'm not a Fish, a Fish guy, but Stefan from Prairiewolf is, I think as big a Fish fan as I know. I mean, he's hugely into. He goes to, the fish dicks thing that happens out here every year. I think he went to 4 of them last year. So.
Yeah,
he's like,
I too,
he brings that into the music for sure.
Oh, yeah, great.
Another well, you guys were both at the Dylan show. Andy, you were at the Dick's run as well.
Dick's run. And the Goose run out in Colorado. Yeah.
Was that at Red Rocks or was that somewhere else?
They did play Red Rocks and Dylan last year with a 3-night run, but I I made it to Goosemas, which was in the First Union Bank up by towards Boulder, in between.
Oh, okay, yeah, off the highway.
Yeah, off the highway there, exactly. 2-night run.
Goose. I mean, I'm open to it, but
where are you in Colorado? Are you in Denver?
I'm right outside of Boulder. I'm in a town called Longmont.
Okay,
nice. So pretty close to that.
All right, we have satisfied our required Goose. Anyway, thanks for telling
that went better than went better than it has in the past.
Anyway, Tyler, thank you so much once again. That is Prairiewolf is the band, stylized as one word, and Aquarium Drunkard, of course. And you also have a Substack, which kind of compiles some of the Aquarium Drunkard stuff you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing. I sort of started the Substack late last year, but I've been doing a blog called Doom and Gloom from the Tomb for many, many years. And it's sort of like it covers a lot of stuff, but I mean, the focus is on like bootleg sort of live rarity kind of recording stuff. So that's another place to check out. Doom and Gloom from the Tomb.substack.com is a good place to start, at least.
Yeah, I don't know how you find the hours in the day, because not a week goes by that I don't see like 3 or 4 things in there that I'm like, this is awesome.
Yeah, I don't know how I do it either.
Anyway, well, we'll give you some more time once we let you go here. So anyway, Tyler, thanks a lot for doing this. Cool. Andy, everybody, etc. So yeah, everybody, thanks for listening to Rock Docs. If you like what you heard, please go ahead and leave us a review. You know how to do that, etc. We're on Twitter at RockDocsPod. And Rock Docs is a Treble media podcast. Treble is, of course, a fully independent media outlet devoted to music. You can find out more at treblezine.com. If you'd like to support the community of writers and creators behind Treble, please head to patreon.com/treblezine. And thanks for listening to Rock Docs.
We got a new group together, right?
Yeah, we got a new group called the Stray Gators.
This is your people.
Well, no, they're the people's people.
Okay, but you brought them in.
What's it like? Recording with Neil? Oh, it's a ball. He's a hellacious talent, man, I tell you.